Hi listeners, Jason here. We are excited to finally announce registrations for the biggest Psych Health and Safety community event ever. The inaugural Psych Health and Safety Conference will be held at the Sofitel Wentworth, Sydney, June 19 to 20, 2024, and offer concurrent virtual attendance. It'll feature live podcast recordings with OG researchers including Christina Maslach and Michael Leiter of Burnout fame, Psych Health and Safety USA podcast host I. David Daniels, Australian super experts including the likes of David Burroughs, a special 10-year anniversary integrated approaches to workplace mental health panel with authors Tony LaMontagne, Angela Martin and Kat Page, hand-picked case studies from organisations doing it well, and a very special interview with plaintiff Zaggy Kozarov by Catherine Dunlop on that High Court case which we previously covered on the podcast. This event will sell out. Get in quick to secure tickets at early bird prices for the 2-day conference, pre-conference masterclasses, and the VIP dinner. The first 200 in-person registrations also get a copy of her latest book, The Burnout Challenge, signed by Christina Maslach herself. Find out more and register at www.psychhealthandsafetyconference.com. Now, on to this episode.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
So welcome everyone to this launch webinar for the Psych Health and Safety Conference. It's something that we have been looking forward to, at least I have, for the last couple of years. Joelle only found out about this a few months ago, but it's something that I've wanted to do for quite a while. And we believe the time is now to pull together, the community that we've been building over the last few years through the podcast, through the webinars that we've been doing with Flourish DX, and really create the biggest conference ever, where we invite a lot of the guests that we've had on the podcast to be there in person in Sydney for June of next year. In this launch webinar, we've got a few people with us, which I'll get to introduce themselves in just a moment. But before I do that, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're on today. Joelle and myself, that's Perth, so that's the Whadjuk people. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So look, the format of today's session essentially is we're going to go through the agenda for the conference. We're going to talk about it with our guests that we've got today around, why is it exciting to have certain elements of the conference and different people presenting on different topics. And we will open it up for Q&A throughout the session. So if you have any questions as we go through, feel free to drop them in the chat. And also we will have time at the end for Q&A, no doubt, as well. But Joelle Mitchell is my colleague at Flourish DX. Joelle, I'll get you to introduce yourself.
Yes, as Jason said, I'm Joelle Mitchell. I'm an organisational psychologist, a human factors specialist, and I'm global head of psychological health and safety for Flourish DX.
Terrific. And we've got two very important guests who are going to be presenting at our conference. Actually, you know what? I do actually have their bio, so I'm going to give them an introduction because I know they don't like plugging themselves. They're very humble people, but these guys are rock stars in the psych health and safety community. So starting with Angela Martin, she has held academic leadership roles, including Associate Dean of Research Management and Discipline Leader, Deputy Head and Graduate Research Coordinator with the Tasmanian School of Business and Economics at the University of Tasmania in beautiful Hobart. She combines a passion for research supervision and research translation in university work with private sector, government and NGO consulting through her company, Academia. Welcome back to the podcast, Angela.
Thank you, Jason and Joelle. Great to be with you today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to both your participation in the conference, but today in the launch webinar, some of your thoughts on some of the panels and topics that we're going to be discussing. And then this guy doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. So David Burroughs is a psychologist with a career spanning more than 20 years as a mental health strategist, consultant and psychologist advisor with some of the best known brands in Australia and internationally. As principal psychologist of Australian Psychological Services, David operates at the nexus of clinical and organisational psychology to help design, implement and evaluate strategies to support positive workplace mental health and proactively manage mental ill health. Welcome again, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
So, so great that you guys can make it. You guys are two draw cards for the conference, and it's great to get your commentary today, I guess, on the agenda and who's going to be speaking. So what I thought would be the best way to go about it is to basically open up the agenda. So I've got it open on my screen behind me. For those of you who are following along from home or on the podcast and can't see what we're sharing, you can find that at ph&scon.com or psychhealthandsafetyconference.com. But essentially, with the conference, we wanted to, despite aiming for 400 plus people live, because we booked quite a large room at the Sofitel Wentworth. We do want it to make it quite a large event. We do want it to make it quite intimate and really be more around conversations and generating new and unseen content. So no disrespect to you, Dave. Dave, you and I go to a lot of the same conferences. I think we get similar invitations, right? I've seen you present 3 times, I reckon, in the last year. And I reckon all of them are kind of like slight variations of the same presentation. Would that be right?
That's pretty consistent, yeah.
Well, you got a key message, right? And you get it out there, right? And it improves every time, don't get me wrong. But it's similar content. So what we thought we would do for the conference is really focus on things like, let's have some fireside chats, let's have interviews. So Dave, we've given a keynote spot, which we'll talk to in a moment, but rather than Dave giving his standard presentation, we're going to get him to be interviewed by Kat Page. So hopefully through that, we're going to get some unique content come out rather than just speaking to PowerPoints, which, I guess a lot of conferences do, and therefore hopefully, make it quite intimate as well, despite the large setting that we're in. Another thing that we wanted to focus on was really talking about key topics related to psych health and safety. So in this conference, it's not going to be around the tertiary prevention stuff like EAP and mental ill health. It's not going to be around, well-being like mindfulness and practicing gratitude and that sort of thing. You can see Dave's having a big sigh of relief right now. But what we're going to be focusing on is psychological health and safety. And related topic areas. So there's 4 key themes for the conference, and they are psychosocial risk management, so applying the risk management framework through a health and safety lens to understanding and mitigating the effects of psychosocial hazards on employee wellbeing and performance. We're going to be talking about burnout, and as we'll discuss, we've got the 2 biggest names in burnout research that are going to be presenting at the conference. One thing that's very dear to Angie's heart is the integrated approach to workplace mental health. And we've got a very special panel that we're going to be talking about in this launch webinar today. And then sexual harassment prevention. So with the amendments to the Sex Discrimination Act, essentially there is now a positive duty for employers not just to have really good reactive support for people who have been sexually harassed in the workplace, but also looking at it through a systemic lens, going, well, what are the systems and processes we have in place to prevent sexual harassment from occurring in the first place? And we've got some key people who are going to be talking to that topic at the conference as well. So 4 key topics. We obviously looking for that intimate kind of conversational style throughout the conference as well. And it's going to be in person and virtual. But I guess starting with conference chair, Liz Payne is a good friend of ours. Joelle knows her pretty well as well. Last time I caught up with Liz actually was in London, actually, at a wellbeing conference there. She was working for Jaguar Land Rover at the time. She's back in Australia, and she's actually taken on chair of the New South Wales College of Organisational Psychologists through the APS. So she's straight back into voluntary work, supporting the profession, the good egg that she is. But she has an organisational psychology background and has done a bit of work in the psych health and safety space as well. So she's going to be chairing the conference. Very gracious of her to dedicate a couple of days of her valuable time to doing that. But I guess what we're going to do on the beginning of each day is we're going to do a live podcast recording. So Joelle and I are going to be on stage. The first day we're going to be having someone in person on stage with us doing a live podcast recording. And then the second day, unfortunately, the person couldn't be there in person. So we're going to do it via Zoom, as we're doing now, doing a podcast recording with that person. But these 2 people are the preeminent researchers, and you might say the OG researchers in burnout. And burnout obviously is a very hot topic at the moment. And they are Michael Leiter, who's going to be flying all the way from Canada to join us in person in Sydney. And then Christina Maslak, who unfortunately, due to family health issues, couldn't travel, but will be doing the podcast recording live with us via Zoom. So I might go over to Ange first, given that you've got more of a grounding in academia than any of us on the call. So What's so important about the research that Michael Leiter and Christina Maslach have done over the last number of decades?
Yeah, so it's a good, 20, 30 years of research, having a look back at, their conceptual work on burnout, in particular, Christina Maslach's work on creating the measurement inventory. That was really foundational work. Both of them are academic superstars. These horrible metrics that we get judged on, things like H index, they're both like 100 or something, which is, way up there. And the thing that I like about their new book as well is just how it's marketed and saying, that idea that burnout is first and foremost a management issue. So I feel really aligned with both of their perspectives on the whole issue of mental health at work. Really well aligned with that sort of philosophy of, looking into the organizational and the job environment, thinking about dysfunctional environments. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from both of them.
Yeah, plenty of opportunities to geek out for those
For sure.
those with that academic bent. What about you, Dave? Have you had any interactions with Michael or Christina before?
Oh, gee, I'm looking forward to it. I've been a fan of their work for such a long time. Was it 97? I think their first book came out in this space. So they were so far ahead of the curve in looking at how work influenced well-being rather than just looking at support or individualistic sort of models. So I think it's just so great that you've got them involved and just how timely it is to have them publishing sort of really useful sort of material like this while we're at this sort of point we're in from psych health and safety at the moment. It just makes so much sense. And I think a lot of us who've been advocating for many, many years around how we need to fix work, but just make sure we support people, it's very much aligned to that sort of way of thinking. So, big kudos to you to be able to get them involved in your event.
Yeah, and that's, again, the beauty of having done the podcast right for the last few years with Joelle. We've been able to, find all these people and create these relationships with them. So when we ask, hey, would you mind traveling halfway around the world to come present at this little niche conference on this topic, psych health and safety, they're willing to do it. But I think, internationally, I think they're all really excited about what's happening in Australia. I think they want to come here and learn about what's happening and maybe take some things back with them as well. So we'll definitely be looking at some international reflections on where the rest of the world is at and where Australia kind of sits.
Seeing more of that at the moment. Sorry, Joelle, we're straight over the top of you.
That's all right. I was just going to say that's certainly the message that we heard from Sky and Andrew from the Congress. So their episode is live now, and with their discussions with international delegates and presenters and that sort of thing, the perspective is that Australia is leading the way. I think what Sky said was to the extent that that there's a bit of an issue there, that they're sort of overestimating how well we're doing in Australia, because we have the legislation in place. So that kind of comes along with the assumption that we must be doing things really well. Whereas, I think where we are at the moment, the legislation is useful to have, but I wouldn't suggest that many workplaces would be at a point where they're complying with the legislation, let alone into the space of what we would see as being best practice or ideal practice.
Did you have some thoughts on that, Dave?
I was going to say I agree completely with Joelle there. I think that I've been doing a lot of work in Asia lately and in New Zealand, and there's almost this sense that we've got it all sorted out here. And I think that there's a lot of organisations on the right journey. There's a lot of people who've been doing this for a long period of time who have got a pretty good handle on what needs to happen. But by and large, I still think we are really early in this from across Australia perspective. But it's great to see the international recognition of the work that's actually happening here. And, the interesting places like the work I've been doing in Southeast Asia, just they want to know what we're doing, and the focus around job design and risk management is front of mind in places where, I was working there 10, 15 years ago. That wasn't part of the conversation. So I think we are leading from an awareness perspective, that's for sure.
It's actually one of the things I'm looking forward to about this conference is the regulator panels and all the discussion and case focuses, because, that it's all emerging practice at the moment. And as you said, Joelle, the legislation's there, but there's still just really low rates of awareness of what it means, confusion about what it means, all sorts. So I'm really interested in those practical case studies and best practice, seeing what that looks like in Australia. So I like the way it's structured with lots of case and discussion. I think that'll be so helpful.
Yeah, and that's really by design, right? We're trying to bring the best academics and thought leaders in the space, and then try and combine that with some handpicked case studies as well. And because Joelle and I know what these companies are doing, we can hand on heart say there's actually some really good things to share, rather than going, oh, you know, that company, they've got a great brand name. Like, let's get them in to talk about what their strategy is, even though they're like nowhere near actually implementing a psych health and safety approach. So all of
that's so critical, Jason. You go to as many conferences as I do. The number of organisations out there showing what they're doing, really well intended, but it's relatively ill-informed, is just so common. And the number of things that are being promoted by providers at these conferences that don't necessarily meet some of the basic standards around what you'd expect in this space. So it's wonderful you've been able to sort of curate who is going to be involved.
Why do you think that is, Dave? Like, is it that the conference organisers don't understand the content well enough to be able to sort of choose the papers or the speakers who are actually in a position to speak to, you know, good practice?
Joelle, I think so, and I don't think any of it's poorly intended. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that we face that conferences like this will help to address, is what does good look like? And, you know, that's why I think making sure we've got the right people there. You know, if you've got a big brand, you're from a big company, you get invited to so many of these sorts of events. And if you don't have somebody external, or you don't have an Angela Martin to tap into, to say, can you sense check the work that I'm doing? Does this follow some sort of psychological health and safety logic? It's easy to go awry in this space. So I think that, you know, a lot of the things we're seeing are really well intended, but they don't necessarily have any rigor to them. And I think this is one of the benefits of what you've got here, is we can have a look. What does rigor look like? Now, what does a systems-based approach look like to these sorts of things? And how can we make sure that we've got the right people presenting who are not just part of a big global brand and therefore a draw card because of their job title?
Yeah. And I was going to say that probably less diplomatically than you, Dave. There's a lot of events organisers looking for a hot topic to make some money off.
And a free speaker.
And a free speaker, right? Yeah. So, yeah, they kind of choose, like you say, the big brand with the big job title and try and get them to present, even though this person might not know what they're talking about in relation to this particular topic. So obviously, Joelle and I have been meeting and working with a number of people over the last several years in particular. So, yeah, you're only going to get people who know their stuff and can speak to it. I've already had people reach out to me asking if they could speak, and I'm like, no, agenda full. Sorry, guys. All right. But yeah, look, Michael and Christina, I think we can all agree, you know, they are the original people looking at this topic of burnout. And like you say, Dave, well ahead of their time, looking at the influence of work on wellbeing rather than purely making it an individual issue and, you know, relying on self-care for wellbeing versus what can the organisation do. So we'll definitely be exploring that. Joelle, we've had Michael on the podcast before. We've been wanting Christina on for some time. You got any choice questions that you're going to ask Christina when we get her on the podcast?
Why did it take so long, Christina? What did we do?
Yeah, well, we are sweetening the deal by buying 200 copies of their book. That's something to mention as well. So we did make Christina amend or atone, I guess I should say, for her tardiness of appearing on our podcast.
Signed 200 books for us, yeah.
Yeah, so she's signed 200 books for us. The first 200 people registering for an in-person ticket will get that book. And Michael Leiter has been a fantastic guy in this whole matter. And he is not only just doing that initial podcast recording with us on day one, he's also going to be doing the VIP dinner, a special panel with that. And also he said he'd do a live book signing over the lunch break on day one as well. So for those people who get that Burnout Challenge book for free as part of their early registration, then you can get Christina's signature on it as well as Michael. And for the geeks and the nerds like us, the four of us on this call, I think that's pretty cool.
I've got a PhD student working on Masluck burnout inventory, psychosocial conditions on board research vessels going to Antarctica. And so if I could somehow get him one, I think I'd be the best supervisor ever.
I might have ordered a few extra, and I'll see what I can do. All right. So the first day following that, we have 2 keynote interviews, right? So rather than straight up presentations, they're going to be interview style. So the first one is going to be Dr. I. David Daniels, who's going to be interviewed by Wade Needham. So many people would know Wade as one of the most influential health and safety leaders here in Australia. He always makes me feel stupid when I have a conversation with him, because he is that sort of intellectual. He speaks, but he can actually take that really intellectual thinking and make it quite practical as well. But he's really looking forward to interviewing David. David is the podcast host of our Psych, Health and Safety USA podcast. He's over a year into that now. He's been able to, like we've done in Australia, really assemble some of the leading thought leaders in the US, and he's gone abroad sometimes as well. But he's really, with the US being at least 5 to 10 years behind where we are in Australia or in this topic area of psych health and safety, he's really trying to do that early work of assembling a community and getting some conversation going. But 2 key themes that he regularly talks to, being a Black man himself, he does talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So he talks about some of his own experiences and brings in other people, specifically from the LGBTQI community, and obviously different ethnic backgrounds as well, to talk about that diversity topic. And he also obviously talks about psychosocial risk management as well. And very much he's a student of what's happening internationally. So what we're really hoping David will be able to provide with us with our interview with Wade is talking about how does psychological health and safety assist in this area of diversity and beyond. But then also, how is Australia perceived internationally, as we've just been talking about? And what are some of the learnings that can be applied in other countries as well? I'm not sure, Ange or Dave, if you've listened to any of Dave's podcast episodes before.
I haven't. I'm afraid I'm not very good on my podcasting. I've only listened to ever about 5 in total. But
okay.
one or 2 of them were yours.
Hey, huzzah. We make up, hey, Joelle, that's a stat we can quote on the podcast. Yeah, 50% of the podcast that Angela Martin has listened to from you is a Psych Health and Safety podcast. I'm not sure about you either, Dave.
I haven't actually listened to any of his podcasts, but the topic areas he's covering are of real interest to me. It's an area that I'm not an expert. So, I love to listen and learn from those people who actually know a lot more than me, which is quite a few people. So, and understanding the US experience is fascinating for me as well, particularly given I do work globally, and the challenges that I see so often around, mental health as an employee benefit rather than a workplace design issue, which is the way I look at it here, is the tensions that a lot of my international client base actually face as well. So, I'm all ears and really keen to hear what Dave's got to say.
Yeah. Dave is a much more eloquent speaker than I'm being right now. And he's very good at getting these concepts across. But I guess the other thing we're trying to do is to really point out the transdisciplinary nature of psychological health and safety. And topics like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is something that often sits under the HR banner. So we really want to appeal to both audiences, right? Human resources and health and safety in particular, and related disciplines. And then how do these work together for common purpose?
Such an important thing to do. If you look at so much of the stuff that we see in organisations at the moment, is whose job is it, and where and how do we interact between diversity, inclusion, recruitment, learning and development, work health and safety, HR, injury management. I think an understanding of that cross-disciplinary approach and how people play together in that space is just so important for organisations to understand. Otherwise, we see noise and a whole lot of fragmented activity.
Yeah,
definitely.
Absolutely.
And I was just going to plug, as well about integrated approach, sort of even we realised that 10 years ago by looking at even the disciplines that have contributed to relevant research, that, the evidence that fits under the 3 pillars. So, that bringing HR and even things like in some projects I've been doing, thinking about building and design and just bringing all these different parts of the organisation together to work on something about mentally healthy workplaces, but they've never even, sort of had any background about mental health. Why am I being invited to this meeting? And then it becomes quite clear, if it's built environment, how that might be impacting people mentally. So, bringing everybody together, we've got to focus on that.
Yeah. And I did a post about it actually just yesterday on LinkedIn. Health and safety have great skill sets around understanding risk and monitoring and looking at things like occupational hygiene, and psychosocial hazards are definitely an exposure issue, like a lot of hygiene factors. But HR and OD are generally the ones that own the controls and the design of work, or at least at the systemic level, right? So it's important that they both can work together and talk the same language.
And that's such an important point, Jason, and one that I think most people haven't really cottoned onto yet, is that when we're talking about controls for psychosocial hazards, most of those are going to sit under your HR function in terms of management systems. You've probably already got a lot of them there that maybe need a little bit of tweaking so that they're doing the job of expanding into another type of people risk that you're managing. But you're not starting from a blank slate. You've already got a whole lot of stuff there that can absolutely be used for this purpose as well as those other purposes. Things like your position descriptions, for example, can be so important to address a number of psychosocial hazards like role clarity, like workload, a whole lot of stuff. So, there is a lot that sits under that people and culture banner that absolutely applies in this space.
Yeah, and that's something I think some companies are starting to wake up to as well. They're going, well, we could wait till we get audited, or, we could wait till we have a notice of improvement by the regulator, and then we have to hustle to find all of our evidence to show, we've got controls in place for some of those hazards. But some companies are going, actually, let's be proactive. Let's actually list out all of the different things that we're doing. Let's then link them to these various psychosocial hazards. And let's actually, while we're at it, not just assume that they're working, but let's actually evaluate, do people know that these things exist, and how effective are these controls really in actually improving or protecting people's mental health?
Or through a lens of consultation.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Rather than just doing it via desktop research. We've got a policy. You actually have to ask people, do you know that this policy exists? Have you ever seen it enacted? As Beck McCulloch would say, a policy that hasn't been enacted is, really not going to work.
That's why, as well, on that point, you were sort of asking what we're looking forward to. I use the Kozarov case all the time in my education work with people to explain the policy that is there that doesn't get followed, and how common that is in organisations, that sort of variable implementation of policies. That's one of the things on the program that I'm really
and that's one of my highlights. We'll talk about that in a moment, because that is one of the key reasons to attend this conference. I think that's going to be fascinating, that conversation. Let's go back to the agenda. We obviously can go on tangents. This could be our full day webinar if we let it. But we've got our first 3 industry case studies. So what we wanted to do in the morning sessions was to get some great thought leaders in. And then in the after lunch sessions, we wanted to do case studies. And the way we're doing the case studies is that each person delivering an industry case study would be given 25 minutes to present. And then at the end of the 3 case studies, then we'll have a half-hour panel where we can be more interactive between the 3 panelists, and we can also have some questions from the audience. So hopefully we can find some common themes and have that more interaction together as a group, rather than just one, the standard kind of 25 minutes talking, then 5 minutes Q&A from the audience. We'll also be using MentMia or Slido. We're not sure which technology we'll use yet, but we'll take some questions from the audience, and then we'll see which ones are the ones that they want to be asking the panel. So you'll have plenty of time during that 2-hour slot to think about your questions and put them out there.
Make sure you got lots of tough questions for Jenny Griffiths at Westpac. She's a seasoned professional. She knows this space really well, and she's got a fantastic story she can tell around the way she's got an integrated approach to psychological health and safety. So I'd encourage everybody to get their really curly questions ready for Jenny.
We'll save
so you can also submit questions, right? So you've got some curly ones that you think would be suitable.
Yeah, no Dorothy Dixes for Jenny. No. So But that's also a good way for the virtual attendees to also be able to feel like they're part of the conference by being able to, submit questions for the panel via that technology, which would be great. The other thing we've been thinking about with the panel, the industry case studies, is to make sure that we're not duplicating any industry. So you'll find that the case studies are from 6 different industries. So obviously Jenny from financial services, Brooke from aviation, David from, healthcare, if we're talking about Lifeblood. We've got Rio Tinto, so that's mining. We've got Horizon, which is logistics and transport. And we've got one yet to be determined. It's I've gone out to a couple of people first to give them the first option. One has to try and wrangle his way over from the UK. So he's still working on that one. So we're going to give him a little bit of time to work that one out before we name the 6th slot for the industry case study. So stop hounding me, people. I've had a few people reach out to me going, I can do a case study for you. I'm like, don't worry. I've got a few people in mind for that last slot.
Maybe keep them on the list for next year, Jason.
Yeah, of course. So Dave, you would know a little bit about what Jenny's been doing in this space of psych health and safety.
Well, I've got a little bit of an understanding, yes.
Yeah. So look, Jenny is, there's a lot of people jealous of Jenny. I think Jenny has, with the support of Dave, accumulated some of the best subject matter experts to work internally in a company in the space of psych health and safety. So when people ask me who's doing this well, and I say, hey, Westpac's doing a great job in this space, but don't try and be a Westpac if you don't have the support of Dave and this, these all-stars that work with Dave and his team as well. So they've got some great things to share about what they're doing in the financial services industry. We've got Brooke, who is I should bring up their job titles as well. She is at Qantas Group, and she's actually been going through a unique way of doing psychosocial risk management, but she's also been doing education across the organisation, particularly with health and safety representatives, on getting them to understand the subject matter of psych health and safety and how they can advocate for their peers as HSRs. We've got David Savio, who's a director in health and safety at Red Cross Lifeblood. So for those international, that's our blood donor service that we have here in Australia. And he's actually been really working through quite strategically about how he's doing psych health and safety and not going for this big organisation-wide approach straight away, but they're just thinking very, very closely and very specifically about what's the best thing to do at this point in time for our organisation, given how large and complex it is. Joelle's been working with Dave on a bit of that. Any more comments on that, other than what he has already shared on our podcast just recently about what they're doing?
Yeah, so I guess that's, his recent podcast is the best sort of insight into what he's been doing. But I guess just to point out that they really are a few years in to their approach and their strategy, and they're sort of, they're learning as they're going, they're trying things and sort of seeing what's working and what's not, and building from those experiences. So I guess they're an example of a company who really has been sort of getting out ahead they've been working in this space well in advance of the regulations coming into force. It's definitely useful to get insights from organisations who are sort of deeper into the process.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
Yeah, true.
Dave's a
And
really practical, nice guy too. Like, he's a really good person to listen to. He's really authentic. So I'm really keen to hear what he's got to say.
Yeah, it's a good way to sum him up, Dave. Absolutely. But three different case studies from three different industries on different journeys, but all doing really great stuff we can attest to. But that brings us to the afternoon slot. And as Ange pointed out, one of the big things that we're really excited to hear is Zaji Kozarov being interviewed by Catherine Dunlop. We actually had Catherine on our podcast talk to the matter. She was very much very close and very aware of the High Court case that Zaji was the plaintiff in, which actually led to her being awarded damages through workers' compensation. And essentially it was due to, I guess, the nature of her work at the time when working for the Office of Public Prosecutions and the psychosocial hazards that she was exposed to. Actually, after that podcast episode, it wasn't long afterwards that Zaji actually reached out to us saying that she really appreciated the way that Catherine explained the matter and talked through the case on the podcast. And so we've been in touch since. And so when we started pulling this podcast together, I said to Joelle, wouldn't it be amazing if we had Catherine on there, but not, again, just talking to the matter, actually interviewing Zaji Kozarov about her experience in that 10-year kind of ordeal going through the court system in Australia, and then the final result. So, Ange, you're obviously aware of this matter. You cite it quite commonly. I think it's the big...
scare all the line managers. Just because you've got the policy and you've got HR and safety behind you, you have to do something too. Yeah. So obviously, like, massive precedent setting, and when, like, Joelle and I have been doing a bit of work with the government health and safety lead over in New Zealand, and it's something that they cite quite frequently as well as relevant precedent as well about how this could be perceived and actioned. So maybe, Ange, maybe you could explain to the group today and the podcast listeners, what is it that's so important about this High Court case that Zaji was the plaintiff in? So obviously I don't have the legal background to talk any about those aspects.
Oh, it's all right. We've got Catherine and Zaji to cover that.
For me, it just really illustrates this point that's been known in the research for a long time in the human resource management literature, actually, about the importance of line managers in implementing policies and referencing the policies in decision making, because otherwise they're just sitting there in the background on the intranet or in somebody's folder, and it's just a common issue, whether it's workplace mental health or other kinds of objectives that the organisation has. This, I've heard Sarah Cotton talk about the boss lottery and this kind of stuff, and I feel like that's a really relevant concept when it comes to building psychological health and safety into an organisation. It means that you've got a policy that says how you're going to deal with a particular psychosocial hazard, but if you go against that policy, and in this case I understand it was to do with rotating in a role to reduce exposure to the sort of content, objectionable content that that person was dealing with, and asking for help and rotation and to be moved and being denied it. So that that's what I understand about the case, but I'm obviously wanting to learn a lot more from the interview.
Yeah, and the idea is to make it really practical, right? What can we pull out of when something went wrong? It's kind of like disaster cast for those people who listen to that. What can we learn from something that went wrong, led to quite a significant injury, psychological injury for Zaji, and how can we prevent that from happening in our workplaces as well? And like you say, the critical role of different people in the organisation, from your functional team members, health and safety, HR, but also to the line leader as well, and how they can protect and promote mental health in their teams.
Yeah, I think really important from this one as well was the judge's findings that just because exposure to a hazard is part of the role or the point of the role doesn't mean that there are not things that the employer can do to reduce harm or reduce risk associated with that hazard. So they were very clear about, I guess what they would expect to see as a minimum for a safe system of work for a role that requires somebody to interact regularly with quite intense hazards.
It's interesting how much attention it's created, and it's a shame someone's been so badly impacted for that to happen. But the notion of job design when people are exposed to vicarious trauma and cumulative trauma has really gone up since then. And I think also, the greater understanding of how done well leaders can be your first line of defence. So I think that this is one great example, unfortunately, of how it actually came about, but where a lot of organisations are very much now learning from those examples, so they're not making those same mistakes as well.
Yeah, and kudos to Zaji for following it all the way through, right? 10 years.
I was just thinking that, incredible tenacity to sustain through that. Yeah.
Yeah, any lesser person would have said just I'm going to give it up. I'm going to take my life back. But, she's obviously very persistent, and hopefully Catherine delves into that character of hers to go, well, what made you, persist with this for so long? But if we didn't have her do that, we wouldn't have this amazing precedent in Australia that we can lean on and go, hey, look, this is what bad looks like, and this is what we can do to avoid similar situations in the future. So yes, Ange this is one of the really exciting things that I'm most excited about the conference, that particular session. Now we've had our first change to the draft agenda. We have a great relationship with Desi Vlahos, who works in the legal profession with a wellbeing focus and a psych health and safety focus, and she's recruited Mel Upton and Minds Count to do a panel directly following this one on the legal profession, which Zaji was obviously a part of. So we'll go from understanding what does bad look like and what can we learn from that into a panel with some very senior people in the legal industry who'll be talking about, hey, what are the problems that we have with the legal industry and what do we need to do to change some of these systemic issues that we, like you're saying, Ange, or Joelle was saying, sorry, we know that these things are harmful and we can just say they're part of the job, or we can say, well, actually, what can we do despite the nature of the job to make these things less harmful? And so, be looking forward to that panel that will be moderated by Mel Upton from Minds Count to explore that. And it's quite timely directly after that interview with Zaji Kozarov as well. Dave, you got any insights into the legal industry and some of the challenges that they face in psych health and safety?
Oh, I think that the entire professional services domain is a real challenge, isn't it? It's an area that I actually probably stayed away from deliberately for quite some time because I haven't been convinced that they've had the motivation to change their business models and the way in which they operate to make them sustainable for their people. I think more of that is happening at the moment, but I still get a little bit uncomfortable around the succession to partnership. It almost seems survival of the fittest based. I know that's not the same within all law firms, and I don't want to be disparaging against any of the professional services firm. I know some people are doing some great work in this space, but I think that they still have a long way to go. And I think a lot of the initiatives that we were seeing in this space, really well intended around things like people's mental health and resilience law and those sorts of things, I don't believe they got the traction or made the difference that they needed to make insofar as how work was being done and people's lived experience of work within the professional services environment. I know there are some consulting firms and things at the moment that are doing brilliant work in this space, changing the way in which they operate. So, I look forward to seeing some of those changes go over into the legal sector as well.
Yeah, and I'd have to say, I think the same, Dave. We know what some of the systemic issues are regarding, billing, the pathway to partnership, that sort of thing. Not conducive to good mental health. And that's going to be definitely one of the things, or a couple of the things that the panel will be talking to, from my understanding, talking about what are these big systemic challenges that we need to address and not taking these things for granted that have always been this way. Yeah.
I think it's really important. I think that I'd love to tap into some legal expertise amongst this as well, because just reading some of the stuff that was produced this week around a lawyer talking around how to mitigate the risk of workplace bullying was really limited in their understanding around the interrelationships between workplace factors and how that can influence counterproductive workplace behaviour. So I think there's a big learning curve there, perhaps for the legal profession as well, around what is psychosocial risk and how does it actually come together for their people.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? And that might be looking at it through their mental models, right? Looking at these issues, going, well, this is a legal issue and this is how we're going to address it, rather than going, well, actually, like you're saying, unsafe behaviours like bullying and harassment might be more a symptom of poor work design rather than the actual issue that is the root cause of the problem.
and consequence management is insufficient in that space. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to learning.
So that'll be an interesting panel, and like I say, really well timed after the Zashi Kozarov interview as well. Okay, so moving on to day 2. So we talked about Christina Maslach in the morning. We're going to be doing that live podcast. Unfortunately, it has to be via Zoom, but it's going to be amazing to have her live and being able to get some questions asked from the audience as well of her while she's with us. Then we have someone to be announced, and it's actually quite a big name in the sexual harassment prevention space. We're just trying to make sure that this person is available at the particular time. But will be quite a big name to add to the conference. And Lucy Brogden, who many people would know as the previous mental health commissioner here in Australia, she has offered to interview this person. And if she can't interview that person because the dates don't align, well, don't worry, we got plenty of other people that we can call on to take that spot and talk to that topic. One of the things that we've noticed in higher education, like the professional services arena, is that psychosocial hazards are rampant. There seems to be a lot of issues with overwork, insecurity, poorly managed change. You name it, right? You name a psychosocial hazard, it probably exists within higher education, and most are having similar challenges. Ange, you work in higher education yourself.
Yes,
part of your role.
This morning have been editing chapters for a new edited book that we've been writing, my colleagues and I, on academic mental health, and it's a global perspective with contributions from people in universities all around the world. And so I think your summary then was fairly accurate, but we have lived experience of being within the academic system, and pretty much I've described it before as a mental ill health factory. So, yeah, I think there are some particular professions and industries, and we've covered law, and I know very well the medical and health industry as well, academia, all sorts of recipes for mental distress baked into the system.
Yeah, tell me, Ange, what makes someone sign up to be an academic and publish things and go through the whole peer review process where people are telling you how bad your work is all the time?
Yeah, being a masochist? No. Early on in the career, and again, I've been writing a chapter on this, reflecting on my career and what things promoted my mental health versus really severely detracted from it. So it's been quite interesting and a personal reflection. But yeah, the peer review process and the whole notion of debate, critique, peer review, it's built into the science model, and it's a good thing, but it impacts people's self-esteem and self-belief, because some of it can be really badly delivered. We all know what it's like to get some constructive but slightly negative feedback on our work, but we've all as academics experienced abusive forms of feedback. And so that's just one aspect, but the sort of KPI'd to the nth degree in terms of how you're judged by others, like I was saying at the start. Have you seen the age index of Michael Leader and Christina Maslach? Oh my God, because that's what you're reduced to at the end of the day, not a human but a metric, and how many citations you have. And yeah, it's just one aspect. Some people can read the book that comes out if they're interested in academia as a system with a lot of problems.
Yeah, and so we have Megan Clark from University of Newcastle, who's been doing a bit of work with us in that psych health and safety space. We actually have a representative from a TAFE, Bendigo Kangan Institute, which is a large TAFE in Victoria, who will also be talking about what they're doing. So not just looking at universities, but TAFE. And then we have a third person lined up to be announced as well to be on that panel, and that will be moderated by Alicia Pappas. Alicia's from our team at Flourish, and she actually used to work for La Trobe University for a couple of years as their psychosocial risk management expert. So she's got some scars as well, Ange, from trying to work within a bureaucracy. Yeah, for sure.
Yes, and they don't really want our help.
Well, they got so much subject matter expertise. So that'll be really interesting, and I think there's going to be a lot of people working in academia in the audience, given the nature of the conference. So I'm sure there'll be a few twitches when things are mentioned, and maybe some rounds of applause. I don't know.
Maybe we need an EAP for the conference attendees, Jason.
Yeah, maybe trigger warning or something like that at the beginning. I won't ask David about his thoughts about trigger warnings, but
it's not evidence-based. John McCreary's paper showed us that on LinkedIn. Yeah.
I love Don.
Yeah, Don's great. So look, then then we have the afternoon of case studies again. So Horizon and Rio Tinto are locked in. And then the third one, like I mentioned earlier, is to be announced, but we've got a couple of people in mind for that one. Then we go to the next, like this and the Zaji Kozarov interview are the two things I thought, if I was planning my perfect conference, this is what we're going to have. And it's just so fortuitous that in 2024, it is exactly 10 years since the initial paper on the integrated approaches to workplace mental health came out with the fantastic authors Tony LaMontagne, Angela Martin, and Kat Page. So we are going to be able to do a retrospective, right, Ange? We're going to be able to have the three key authors from that paper on stage at the same time talking about what kind of led to this model being developed and then what has transpired over the last 10 years. So what are some key things that you get?
So this is very cool in terms of getting the band back together, and it has been 10 years, and I feel every one of them since we did that. But one of the things when we put it together was we were trying to say in our argument, this focus just on mental ill health is not going to get you anywhere. So we were trying to really bring together, that stuff about, I was working in some of my very early work on depression in the workplace from a manager's perspective and things like that. So we were trying to bring that together with Tony's work, as an occupational health epidemiologist, looking at those sort of big studies and risks around the psychosocial hazard stuff. So we were doing a project where we were trying to integrate sort of mental health literacy with psych health and safety. And then we had Kat, who is a great advocate of positive psychology, saying, hey, don't forget about all the promote the positive stuff and all the psych capital and all these really positive constructs. So we said, okay, well, if we try to fit everything that's research, we've got 10 different disciplines contributing to these 3 topics, let's line them up and see what they look like. And so we were really just looking at evidence behind the 3. We're trying to do research translation, which is to speak to audiences that are practical and not academic about, well, what should I be doing? And we figured that if we just told them it was only 3 things, it might be easier to get them to come along on the journey. So what's going to be great about that session is us 3 reflecting on, the work that we've done, using that as a base. I use that as a base in all my consulting work, so I'll be able to bring in some examples there. Kat's out working, commercial in the corporate sector, plenty of good examples there. And well, Tony, as you know, just a superstar, has just published this big thing in the Lancet, which is the top medical journal. Finally, we're getting the recognition of these issues in medical research, prestigious journals as well. So yeah, we'll be really interested to hear from people in the audience who've been working with the model, as well as sharing our own perspectives and also maybe where we might go to in the future. We have been planning to write another paper for about 4 or 5 years and it hasn't happened. So maybe when we're at the conference, we'll use that as the motivation to get a new paper out.
If we can inspire. Yeah.
Tradition suggests that it should be started on a beer coaster, I believe.
Or a glass or 2, a good red.
Oh, yeah, there's always a good fun with our team. So I'm looking forward to the fun as well.
If that's the one thing that comes out of the conference, that we inspire to write a follow-up paper, then I think that would be definitely worthwhile putting the whole conference on for that. But I think I can safely say that Dave, Joelle and myself, we have that integrated model that underpins the work that we do through our consultancy as well. So, it's been hugely impactful. And obviously it now is something that's been picked up by the National Workplace Initiative here in Australia as well. And even the World Health Organization and International Labour Organization in their guidelines that came out in September of last year are referencing that integrated model. So it's now not just, something that
not just Australia. I know it is
not just Australia. It is global. That's probably one of the biggest things, right, to come out in the last year or 2, that, it's being adopted by organizations like the World Health Organization. So amazing. So it's going to be so cool to be able to reflect with the 3 of you and that panel. I've put my hand up to moderate that one, of course.
Put your hand up.
Well, I said, nah, it's mine.
Elbowed you out of the way, didn't he?
All dibs is what happened.
Yeah, I'm like, if I can pull this conference together and pull this panel together, I'm moderating it by hell or high water. And then we have Joelle moderating the very last session of the day. We thought it would be a good way, like Angela was saying, to bring some regulators together to talk about how they're working with employers to understand the regulations. Obviously, well, maybe not obvious to everyone, but the regulations here in Australia has definitely gone ahead of where practice is. As Joelle was mentioning, most companies wouldn't even be compliant and tick every box of the model code of practice, for example. So they'll be talking about how they're both educating employers around what their obligations are and how to meet their obligations, and then also how are they enforcing it as well. So we've got Jim Kelly from Safe Work New South Wales, Libby Brooke from WorkSafe Victoria, and then Sally North from DMERS here in WA has just taken that third slot on that panel. So you'll get a great national representation on that panel, which would be fantastic.
And great people too. And I think having them there will showcase that the regulator is not your enemy in this space. These people are doing a wonderful job educating. And I know Libby quite well, and I know Jim quite well, and they are absolutely great human beings who we really should be listening to and working in partnership with in this space.
Yeah, they're not there to wrap people on the knuckles, right? They actually want just people to do the right thing, and they want to help people understand what is the right thing and how to do it, right? So, yeah. And I'd say that all three of them are quite pragmatic and practical as well, right? They're not just like, this is the regulation, you must do this. It's like, no, how do you achieve that?
Yeah, and they're coming from three very active regulators in the psychosocial space as well, that they're all doing significant work in the space and in Victoria in absence of regulations in force. So don't let that stop you, people.
No, Victoria has been the most punitive recently, right, with the fines handed down for sexual harassment and for a suicide, unfortunately,
Coroner's
that happened.
Court.
Yeah, the coroner's court one. I'm conscious of time. There's just three. So that's kind of like the conference, right? So amazing, and hopefully you can see through the enthusiasm of Dave and Ange with what we've curated. It's going to appeal to quite a wide range of people from HR and health and safety and org psych and related disciplines. It's going to be quite. You're going to get a really good understanding of the theory from the key people who actually developed these key theories that all of us use in our consulting work. But then also make that practical through those industry case studies as well. And like I mentioned, it's going to be conversational and quite intimate, hopefully, developing new content as we go in the conference rather than rehashing things or death by PowerPoint. There are three extras on top of the conference that people can choose to come along to. So pre-conference, we have two half-day masterclasses. The first one will be delivered by myself and Heather Eichen. That will be Psych Health and Safety 101. So before going into a big brain dump of 2 days worth of, some of quite detailed or maybe more mature discussions around psych health and safety and its application, we have a 101 half-day course as well. So if you are planning on sending any of your team members that haven't been introduced to psych health and safety before, probably a good idea to get them on the 101 half-day workshop on the Tuesday of that week before going into the conference proper. And then in the afternoon masterclass, we've got Joelle and Andrew from our team who will be delivering a masterclass around developing a psychosocial risk management framework. What does that look like? What are the key things you need to think about? And making that quite practical so that you can go back to your organisation with a bit of a structure on what you need to address and how you might start going about that. The other key extra that's going to be really exciting is the VIP dinner. So not only is that a 3-course meal with all your drinks and great food included at the Sofitel, but also we're going to be doing a very special panel. So we're going to have 3 of our keynotes. So that will be I, David Daniels, Michael Leiter, and Tony LaMontagne on the one panel, right? And we're going to have it more as a fireside chat between the 3 of them. And that will be moderated by Laura Kirby, who many of you know as the Chief Mental Health Officer at Commonwealth Bank. And I know a good friend of Dave and Ange's as well. And I know that Dave and Laura have worked together quite a bit together too. So she'll be the perfect person to moderate that panel of international superstars of psych health and safety. So that's we've only got about 30 tickets, I think, left for that because all of our presenters hopefully will be going to that VIP dinner. So it's going to be a great opportunity to network with some people who are really ahead of the game and really, great thought leaders in the space. And we all get to nerd out a little bit longer, right, with another special panel, which would be great. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Like I said, the website is open now for registrations. We do have super early bird right up until midnight on Christmas Eve, the 24th of December. So if you want to get in at a cheap rate, get in early. And remember, we've only got 200 copies of the Burnout Challenge that's been signed by Christina Maslach. So if you get in early, you'll also get one of those books signed when you attend in person at the conference. If you can't make it in person, we do have a virtual attendance option as well. And with both of those options, regardless whether it's in person or virtual, you will get 6 months access to all of the content that we're going to record during the conference. So you can go back and re-listen to some of those things, or even share with a loved one. So, any final thoughts, guys, before we wrap up for today? Starting with you, Joelle.
It's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it. That's it.
All right. It's going to be really good. Ange, anything else?
I can't wait to hang out with you all. I can't wait to enjoy a beverage with you and just hear and from experts, learn more. It doesn't matter how much of an expert you are. There's always so much more to learn. So,
Yeah, well said. And Dave?
What Ange said, particularly the dinner. I can't wait for that. As much as I want to hear all the guest speakers and see the panels and learn from everybody, the opportunity to socialise is also a really big one for me.
Mm.
Yeah. So, we're aiming for over 400 people. And I think with the number of people who've reached out to me saying they got 6 people on their team they're going to send along to the conference, I'm fully expecting it to sell out well before early bird finishes.
Do we want to talk about the bet, Jason?
We're not going to talk about the bet, Joelle.
Okay.
But okay, now you mentioned it. Now we have to say something about it.
Oh, so no.
Dan, who our regular podcast listeners would know, is kind of the
Office Grinch.
Office Grinch, yeah, that's a good way to put him. Yeah, he's always the naysayer. Joelle and I reckon we've got a good chance of selling the first 200 tickets in person with the Christina Maslach book as kind of like the candy to attract people within the first couple of months. Dan reckons that we're no chance. And so we have a bet against it, which might be wearing weird clothing down to the local shops to do the grocery shopping for whoever loses. So don't make me the loser, everyone. We will put photos up of Dan wearing some attire that is not flattering if you help us to secure those tickets early. For those actually who are looking to justify their trip, if you need to get your boss's sign off on it and budget sign off, there is actually a link on the website to an email we've already created for you that you can just modify to your needs to get your boss across the line and get you to the conference.
Thought of everything.
We've tried to. So, no, but as you can see, we're all really excited about it, right? Looking forward to seeing as many people from the community as possible at this event, and sharing and learning together, and like Ange said, having a tipple as well. So thanks everyone for coming along to the webinar today that we recorded, and we look forward to having further conversations with you over LinkedIn and future webinars. So thanks everyone, and thanks to Dave and Ange for joining Joelle and myself today.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.